Welcome to Psych Sessions Mentoring. In these episodes, Kenzie Peterson and Mona Shu chat with their guests about all things mentoring in higher education. So thanks for tuning in and welcome to Psych Sessions Mentoring.
I'm Kenzie Peterson.
And I'm Mona Shu, and this is a special Psych Sessions series on mentoring.
Our guest today is Dr. Melissa Robertson, Assistant Professor in the Department of Psychological Sciences at Purdue University. Dr. Robertson's research focuses on the intersection of work and relationships. She is interested in how relationships in work and non-work settings affect workers' well-being, career development, and inclusion. Dr. Robertson is also interested in the development of close, fulfilling, and satisfying relationships at work. Her recent work focuses on mentoring relationships, particularly the mentoring experiences of people from underrepresented backgrounds. Her work uses a variety of research designs, such as experimental, observational, longitudinal, experience sampling, qualitative, and dyadic, and analytic techniques, such as structural equation modeling, lag sequential analysis, and multi-level modeling to address these topics from a person-centric perspective. Welcome to Psych Sessions and our series on mentoring, Melissa.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. So we'll just go ahead and jump right on in. What is mentoring, or what is a mentor from your perspective?
Sure. So I'll give you the scientific definition that we use in our research is that mentoring is a developmental relationship between an older or more experienced mentor and a younger or less experienced protege. Some kind of things about that definition that are important is that we typically think about it as fundamentally dyadic, even though mentoring might occur in larger structures. The basic unit is the dyad. It's usually formed for the purpose of developing the protege, even though mentors also experience benefits. That's not typically the primary purpose of the relationship. And then that development occurs relationally. So through mentors and proteges interacting, the proteges and the mentors both experience developmental benefits. And so the literature talks about two kind of ways that benefits are bestowed, or I guess are incurred for the protege. One is through kind of the explicit provision of support from the mentor to the protege. And then the other is through role modeling. So watching what the mentor is doing and emulating that.
Ooh, yeah, I like that definition includes both. Here's how I'm directly influencing my mentee, and here are some ways that maybe I'm indirectly influencing my mentee. So I think that's really nice to encompass both aspects.
And it's very hard to assess that role modeling piece. Often we don't realize what messages we're communicating in an indirect way that our proteges are picking up on.
Oh, yeah. I didn't think about that part, about how tricky the measurement aspect is of that, which I think it's going to be really interesting to explore this more research heavy side of mentoring with you.
Sure.
I guess just out of my own curiosity, how have you in your research tried to measure that, and how have you gone about that?
Yeah, so the one that we use most commonly in my field in industrial organizational psychology is called the mentor role instrument. And it was developed by Bell Reagans, and Cotton is the last name. I can't remember the first name of the co-author. But it's a really great measure based on Kathy Cram's kind of foundational work on mentoring in organizations. So Kathy Cram did this qualitative study of mentoring in an organization. And most of the research in industrial organizational psychology has really emerged out of that theoretical tradition, including that measure. And so one of the subskills is role modeling, but there are also subskills to capture other functions that mentors provide.
That's so helpful. I don't know if I'm really familiar with that instrument. And it might be because I don't really have much IO kind of interaction. So as you were saying that, it's I need to Google this and read about it. It's
really interesting how different fields have their own theoretical tradition and kind of definitions of what constitutes mentoring scholarship. And as we've been doing work that's become more interdisciplinary, we're learning about all of those nuances and differences that occur across fields.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the really nice perks of getting to do this series is we're hearing from different perspectives. Even people within the same general psychology field talk about it very differently, think about it very differently, and then approach it differently in terms of how they mentor as well as how they might conceptualize it for research. So you've given us these great ways to think about it, especially informed by your field and definitions. I'm curious a little about your own mentoring. How would you describe your mentoring style?
I think the word that comes to mind is relational. I try to really develop that one-on-one relationship with my students. And I think that's really important. Different proteges have different needs and different goals, and the same advice or strategies might not be applicable to all of those different proteges. So the first step is, I think, understanding who the protege is and what they need, and then providing responsive support based off of that. So I really try to get to know my students. I will say it has been more challenging during the pandemic time. That's when I started as an assistant professor, and that's when my students started. So navigating, how do we develop that relationship in a remote context? I think it has been challenging. And now that we're in person, there's more of those informal connection opportunities. They're harder to replicate on Zoom.
Absolutely. I am right there with you in figuring out that challenge. One thing that's coming up that I just wanted to ask you about is terminology. So I notice you're using the word protege, and I know sometimes people use mentee instead or other words. And I was just wondering if you could comment on that word choice.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think it's really just based in your theoretical tradition, what the term is, but I would use them interchangeably. I don't think mentee is wrong. And sometimes I use it. I think when you're communicating to people who are in mentoring programs, often mentee is the preferred term that people are more familiar with. So I just try and change my terms depending on the audience that I'm speaking with.
Thank you.
And can you tell us just a little bit about who, or I guess in this case, it might be more interesting to explore what has really influenced your mentoring style?
Sure. I think a lot of it is through your personal experiences with mentors. And so I had a wonderful mentor when I was an undergraduate student who opened the world to me. I just had no understanding of academia, graduate school, any of that type of life. And she shepherded me and helped me understand the possibilities that I didn't even know existed. Her name is Kim Bartholomew. She was amazing. And she studied attachment, and I really wanted to study relationships and just had no real specific sense I wanted to study mentoring. But I ended up going to work as a graduate student. And my major professor was Lillian Eby, who's a mentoring scholar. And so it was a great place to bridge that social psychology, relational focus that Kim had really helped foster when I was an undergraduate to graduate work with Lillian Eby. And they were both phenomenal and are both phenomenal mentors and really took an interest in me personally. I felt like there was closeness that I hadn't experienced with a professor before in that relationship. And they really cared about my development. So through role modeling what they did, but then also through our work, we've learned effective strategies for developing close relationships that we think apply equally in mentoring relationships. Mutual self-disclosure is one of those cornerstones of developing a close relationship. And I'm very cognizant of that with my students. So I try and disclose a lot of information about myself to open that door for them to disclose if they feel comfortable. And I found in my experiences that learning that information about other people's personal lives and journeys, really, you can't predict easily what someone else will resonate with. And so being as open as I feel comfortable, which is pretty open about my different identities and roles and the things that are important to me, I think helps create that sense that it's okay to come to this relationship to be your full self, and that will be accepted and fostered.
As you were talking about your experience with learning how to be a mentor, I saw so many parallels between my own journey. Because I also, when I was an undergrad, had a mentor who essentially, took me underneath his wing and taught me the ropes of how to get prepared for grad school and what we actually do in psychology and all sorts of just incredibly important lessons that I couldn't have gotten in the classroom. And then, coming into Mona's lab and now working with somebody who is very interested in mentoring and best practices there. There was just a lot of similarities.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you sometimes don't know the questions to ask until somebody else opens your worldview and sees that potential in you. And I just think that those one-on-one interactions with undergrads, we see many students sometimes, and it's sometimes the importance of that interaction is not recognized by the faculty member, but by the student. It can make a huge difference in their trajectory and in the possibilities they think are available to them in their lives. I think as much as we can, trying to figure out, even when we're teaching big classes, how to have those personal connections. Like that's been the most important part of the teaching experience for me, but also the most challenging as enrollment grows. So I'm still learning how to create that.
So much of what you're saying resonates with me because it's something that I've grappled with too over the years, like how much to reveal or talk about. And certainly there are ways to approach teaching and mentoring that are very, this is a professional only relationship and you kind of leave all your identities at the door and it's more transactional and more just let's focus on this one piece of work. But recognizing that there's a lot of value in showing up as our genuine selves and dealing with each other as whole people and being able to be in community together. And I love what you're talking about in terms of, you role model that or you show that it's safe to do so, not in a pressury so that they feel like they have to reveal stuff, but just, hey, I'm going to be vulnerable here. So hopefully making that space one where it doesn't just have to be about end products, right? It's also about the person and that relationship. So I really appreciate that. That actually might really lead well into our next question, which is how DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion has shown up or not for you in your mentoring experiences, whether as a mentor or as someone being mentored.
Yeah, it's a great question. So that's been one of the major focuses of our research over the past couple of years is understanding the mentoring experiences of proteges from underrepresented groups. So we have a few different projects. One is directly related to what you were just talking about. So we did a qualitative study where we interviewed proteges from a wide variety of different backgrounds who are of different career backgrounds who are all from underrepresented racial or ethnic groups. And in that project, we just finished analyzing the data and we're presenting it later this week at our conference. We found 3 kind of major themes ways that mentors could provide what we called inclusive mentoring. The first one was professional integration. So this involves really it's kind of the invitation, enabling the protege to become integrated into professional life. So I think about it differently than just kind of informing, where the mentor is the provider of information and providing it in this downward way to the protege. It really seemed to involve much more bringing the protege into the professional sphere. So that was through invitations, through giving them challenging and autonomous work, giving them a chance to take ownership over things in the work environment. Most of these were professional situations, not academic. And so that was one major theme, is integrating the protege into the professional sphere. The second was this personal integration. So integrating the protege into personal life. And people did that in a variety of ways as well. So one was through this personal self-disclosure, but other things that many mentors may not have experience with or may have some discomfort around, like introducing the protege to family, inviting them over to their house, sharing meals outside of the work environment. So that was the second kind of major theme that we found, was this personal integration was really important. And then the third was protection. So it wasn't just protection from protection is a function in original CRAM's original mentoring theory. And we found evidence of protection from people who might be kind of out to get you, which is kind of how she originally thought of it. But we also saw it was a lot broader, also involving efforts that the mentor would protect the protege's self-esteem from potential identity threats, especially those associated with lack of experience or making a mistake or not knowing what you're doing. You know, those things that are really common when you're first learning. It seems to be really important for the mentors to provide some bolstering of self-esteem and affirmation and normalization that mistakes are a normal part of the process when you're learning. So that was kind of a nice segue from your original discussion of the importance of self-disclosure. That seems to be really important in these relationships involving proteges from underrepresented groups. We don't have any data to see whether it's more important for people who are underrepresented versus well-represented. So that's the next phase of the research, is to look at, are we just finding that these are important for everyone, or are they especially important for people who are traditionally underrepresented in a lot of these workplace contexts?
That's so fascinating. And I'm really appreciating you being able to come at these questions from your experience, but also from the research side of things, and giving us a sense of what we know, what we don't know, and what boundary conditions we might be still thinking about. And I'm just jotting all this down.
Sure.
So
I
want these papers out already.
I think there is a personal component as well, which is as my lab is more diverse, my desire to be an effective mentor to people who don't just look like me and come from the same experiences as I do also increases and becomes more important. That's something, it's really important to me to have a diverse science and to foster an inclusive work group. And so my research, I think, is informed by that goal and that context, that, you know, when I have these relationships with people who are from different countries, who are from different racial backgrounds, who are from different gender identities, how can I be an inclusive and effective mentor? So I like the practical implications of our work personally as well.
Yeah. And I can imagine this is something that for a lot of people on either side of the mentoring relationship can be difficult to navigate that personal integration. Like, how much do you do? And maybe it's a little more challenging if you aren't from the same cultural background and you don't want to offend someone, but you also don't want to feel, be too pushy if they don't want to come to your house. Or so, yeah, right. Navigating those, I can imagine, can be, fun and exciting, but also quite challenging at times. And maybe people are less likely to lean into that personal integration because the safer route is to just keep it professional and no personal integration, right?
Yeah, I do think you're right. And I think especially from mentors. So when we talk about our findings, typically the proteges are nodding along and it really resonates with them. And the mentors are really navigating that boundary between what's professional and what's not professional, and sometimes reimagining what it might look like to have a professional relationship that's not so highly segmented within the kind of physical boundaries of where you're working, or like even the informational or like emotional boundaries of the relationship are often constricted. So I think that there's a lot of implications of kind of understanding boundaries when it comes to mentoring. And that's very much on people's minds, but in different, potentially conflicting ways between mentors and proteges, where mentors might be more interested in upholding boundaries that exist, and proteges might be more interested in integration. And then it becomes a tension and like a bit of a power struggle. Not in every relationship. Maybe there's a need to understand individual differences and those preferences as well.
Yeah. Speaking of implications, I'm wondering, as you were talking, I was thinking back to your definition from the literature of what mentorship is. And there's a little bit of a mismatch, right? That definition is very, a little hierarchical, right? It's someone who's older, possibly who has more experience. It's a little similar to a teaching kind of thing where you're transmitting information. It's more meant in one direction. And what you're talking about seems much more level and much more integrative. And I don't know, is it time for our field to rethink that definition and bring in some of those pieces?
Yeah, I've been struggling with this tension as well, and the literature has as well. So yeah, that's a major criticism of traditional mentoring theory, is that they call it, Reagan says this term, the Godfathers and Yoda's view of mentoring, where it's this unidirectional flow of support from the mentor to the protege on the mentor's terms. And that her theory would suggest that the best mentoring relationships are characterized by more equality, by more mutual provision and receipt of support, by mutual growth and learning. I think that's probably true. So I think, yes, as the relationship becomes better, the hierarchy may, not the hierarchy in terms of distance between rank, because that may carry throughout the mentoring relationship in terms of the experiential difference or the age difference, but the difference in the power dynamics may change over time. The criticism I have, or I guess the counter argument I have, is then what if we don't define mentoring as a relationship between a more experienced and a less experienced person? Then what differentiates it from a friendship or other forms of relationships? And so I think for me, mentoring always has the experiential difference, but whether that's associated with a difference in power and in benefit, I think is an open question. And you might also think too, like in peer mentoring, so lots of people have been talking about peer mentoring. I would say what might differentiate a peer mentoring relationship from a friendship is that one of those people have more experience in a particular domain than another person, and that creates the mentoring component of that relationship. But the other person may have more experience in a different domain, and so they can mutually benefit and mentor each other in this domain-specific type of way. I'm still thinking through the implications for differentiating between different forms of relationships, if that's even valuable.
Yeah, I would say that, at least from my experiences, like being a mentee or a protege, I definitely, in a way, relate to that basic definition of this is this experienced older person who you're going to gain like a lot of benefits from. But I feel like as I grow in my mentoring relationships with time, like that dynamic definitely changes, where it's like, oh, okay, like I have some things that I can also like contribute and give back to my mentor and teach them about things. Like with Mona, I've been able to help her out with the qualitative side of things because I took a class in that and have a little bit more experience. And actually, I think that dynamic is incredibly helpful for that mentoring relationship, because I feel like it hits on at least hits on the first theme that you brought up in that research, where there's that integration of like professionalism. And I feel like now I get to demonstrate my knowledge and my ability to like hold my own in the field by working with Mona on this project and, teaching her a little bit about what I know. So I know that was like off subject a little bit, but just as we're talking about that definition changing, I can see it evolving in my own life. And I think that's really neat.
Yeah, I think that you're spot on that the role of time is so underappreciated in mentoring and in close relationships in general. Often the reason that we are paired together, or the purposes that we're paired together initially, don't become the reason for the relationship down the line. And the benefits experienced, while initially asymmetrical, they become much more symmetrical over time. And you would hope that would be the case, because if the relationship is successful at the beginning, it means the protege is developing in a way that has potential benefits for the mentor as well, to reap the benefits of that development. So yeah, I mean, there's lots of calls for longitudinal mentoring research. And of course, any longitudinal research is really hard to do, but really important, I think, for understanding how those relationships evolve and maybe different trajectories that relationships may take.
Yeah. And Kenzie, as you were talking, I was thinking about our relationship too, as Melissa was sharing these really helpful and thought-provoking ideas, right? Like, how does mentoring work over time? On paper, I'm your advisor, right? So that lasts until you're out of the program. But in the time that is happening, like when you are teaching me something, which I will say is like one of the highlights for me in our relationship, is getting to be on the receiving end of your expertise and knowledge. Are you then my mentor embedded within me being your mentor? Or is it more, no, you're my teacher at that point on a specific thing, but the mentoring relationship is still what it is. And over time, yeah, like you've developed so much. And I think of you as such an independent person that it really is just more than anything, you're my collaborator and my colleague. And we have the structure of a formal mentoring relationship, but it feels very different than first semester when you stepped in and we were really establishing things. I'm assuming in the research, there's not a ton of longitudinal data, especially at the dyadic level of like really following people and seeing.
Right. Yeah. That work is really hard to do, understandably. But very important, I think. There is like Cram's original theory. I think it was based on retrospective accounts. It talks about the phases of mentoring relationships that they often go through on average. It was qualitative work. And that was a really key part of the theory, but something we don't have a lot of quantitative research on, I think, because of how challenging it is to do. But it is interesting what you were saying about these mentoring episodes within the relationship where the roles may reverse, where the protege may be providing what we would think of as mentoring functions to the mentor. And does that change the nature of the relationship? I don't know. I'd have to think more about that, because you probably wouldn't define Kenzie as your mentor. So there's something about maybe the primary reason that you came to the relationship, the extent of the support provided and in what direction over time, and the expectation that Mackenzie will develop over time and grow in competence kind of is embedded into the reason you got together. But yeah, I'm going to think about that and flip mentoring episodes.
Yeah, I like that. You'll have to get back to us and share some of your thoughts on that. Because yeah, to me, I'm like, it's almost like it evolves into that like peer mentoring relationship that you were touching on a little bit, but not exactly, because I'm still going to go back to having Mona be like my main mentor, and our relationship isn't going to like dramatically change in terms of who is the mentor.
Right.
But yeah, we both have different things that we can contribute that maybe the other one isn't as knowledgeable on, which is interesting.
Yeah. So you're developing domains of expertise over time. You both are, that you can mutually engage in for the other's development. And there's lots of discussion about how mentoring helps the mentor become a better mentor through learning through experience. That's what we would hope. There is that idea that the mentor should develop as a result of the relationship, but maybe we don't think about it in more domain specific ways.
This has been such a fun conversation. And I just wanted to know from you what advice you would give to mentors.
So my number one piece of advice, which is based solely on my own experience and not on my research, would be to surround yourself with people who exemplify excellent mentoring. I think we very easily can develop cultures of poor mentoring, where it becomes normalized to not have great relationships with your proteges, or it's just a box to check off if you're in a formal mentoring program. And I think that community of supportive mentors helps reinforce norms that mentoring is important and valuable and something that you should engage in. And also helps you have people to go to that will prioritize the relationship above just telling you what make you feel good as a mentor. So I think trying to find people who you think are excellent mentors and spending time with those people talking about mentoring is super important. And then I think also something I hear sometimes is some mentors will specialize. They'll say, I'm really good at providing like the technical skill and knowledge to the protege, but I don't feel very comfortable providing the more psychosocial aspects of support. And so those proteges should go to someone else who can provide them. And I think that it's good to be reflective and to understand your strengths and your weaknesses, but I don't think it's effective to segment the relationship like that. And if you recognize those areas of growth, then I think the mentor needs to take responsibility for developing competence in that area. So that means you need to practice. Like anything, you need to practice, you need to get feedback, and be really intentional about learning those aspects of mentoring that you might not be as comfortable delivering. And then I think the third thing I've just learned also through experience is to know your capacity. That mentoring takes a lot of intentional work and effort, and developing relationships is hard, especially at the beginning. And so you can't, I don't know, I think there might be a limit on the number of successful, high quality, really developmental relationships you could have at any one time. And so I know for me, like I have a certain capacity, and then beyond that, I would be doing a disservice to my existing proteges by taking new ones on, even though I really want to help more students or have more students in my lab, or we have so much work to do. Knowing your mentoring capacity, I think, is really important. So lots of self-reflection, and then efforts to develop or set boundaries when you need to set boundaries about the number of people that you can mentor.
And this is a theme throughout our conversation, Melissa, you keep perfectly setting us up for the next step. I think those are all fantastic pieces of advice. And especially our last one about capacity leads us to our final question that we've been asking all our guests. Given that rest and recharging is important, what is your favorite form of self-care? Maybe when you've reached capacity and need a little bit of a boost.
I will say this is an area I am developing in. I'm at a busy season of life because I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old and a tenure track job. So I feel like my capacity is at max right now. But, in thinking about what I really benefit from the most, it's just space to learn. Like I feel when I have just space to read a book without an expectation that it needs to be and become an article, or space to learn a new technique that I don't have any immediate application, I find that type of expansion opportunity really exciting and fun, and helps me feel like I'm growing, but in a way that's not so instrumental. And I find the benefits go much farther beyond just the initial moment of self-care. So that's what I do. I watch a YouTube video on a new technique, or I read a book outside my field, and that helps me feel like I'm growing in a way that's not just for my roles.
That's fantastic. So having the space to play and do something exciting and learn without any sort of goal of I need to make this product or.
Yeah, I never thought of it as play, but I think that you're right, that's a good word for it.
And I'll just say, this is my bias, but as you were talking, I was like, oh, that sounds like self-expansion.
Yes.
So that's some of my past work and some current work too. So I'm always seeing that everywhere. It's like, oh, excitement, novelty, learning things, growing, adding to your self-concept.
Absolutely. My graduate student, Fan Yi, loved self-expansion theory, and she's been studying it as well. So I learned from her as well concepts about the positive benefits of self-expansion, and have also personally experienced that's the case. So I think there's a lot of application of self-expansion theory to the relaxation from work, psychological detachment literature that maybe we haven't capitalized on as much as we could have.
Yeah, and I recognize the funniness of bringing this work piece up in our talk about self-care. But as you were talking, I was thinking, I wonder what the role of self-expansion is in mentoring. on both sides. And I don't know, maybe we should collaborate and do something about that.
Oh my goodness. So many collaboration opportunities. I think it's interesting because you would expect that at the beginning of the relationship, there would be the most expanding potential, but that is often a kind of fraught. That time is often somewhat precarious because you're trying to understand each other. And does this person really get me? Do they understand my needs? And so I wonder if there's a hurdle you need to get over initially before the expansion can really develop. And then maybe the benefits for the mentor start to come the most during expansion episodes where the protege is providing expansion for you.
Right. Or where developmentally the expansion may be lopsided a little in the beginning, right? It may not be as novel, right? If someone has mentored a whole bunch of times before, right? But then later when it's more of a equitable, hey, all the foundation work is laid out and you can really get into the learning from each other piece, then it might be very equitable self-expansion, which might be especially good for mentoring. So I don't know, we could think about mentoring as getting to that point with self-disclosure, with personal integration and professional integration, where it's self-expanding for both sides.
Yeah. And you're expanding. I mean, I love this idea. I feel like we could talk about this for hours. I never thought about the integration from a self-expansion perspective, but I think that does make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I haven't either. And I feel bad as a self-expansion person, but we can continue this conversation for a long time.
Sure.
But thank you so much for joining us and sharing all of your knowledge and research expertise and helping us come up with some really new ideas that we can maybe try to explore. And thank you to everyone listening. Stay tuned for more episodes in this series.
Thank you for having me. This has been really great and so lovely to talk to people who are passionate about mentoring and want to make it the best that it can be.
Our pleasure.